The crystal glass didn't just shatter on the marble floor, it shattered the illusion. One moment I was Maria Caldwell, the pregnant wife of a millionaire, smiling through a charade of perfection. The next, a shard of baccarat was embedded in my cheek, a testament to my husband's rage. He hadn't even looked at me, his eyes fixed on the woman he was trying to impress. The silence that followed was louder than the gasp of 100 guests. They saw the blood, the glass, the monster, but I had been living with him for years. Wealth clung to the penthouse like a second skin, a mingling of imported lilies, chilled champagne, and the crisp whisper of purified air scrubbing the city's grit from existence. 80 floors up, New York shimmered below, a distant constellation beyond the private world Alexander had built behind glass. Tonight was the Caldwell Foundation Gala, a stage for him to display not just generosity, but control. His donations weren't gifts. They were precision investments, each one engineered to yield a 100-fold return in influence. I smoothed down the silk of my custom-made gown, the deep emerald fabric chosen to complement my eyes, or so Alexander's stylist had said. In reality, it was chosen to artfully conceal the gentle swell of my 5-month pregnancy, a fact we hadn't yet made public. It was another of Alexander's strategic reveals, waiting for the perfect market upswing or media opportunity. My life was a series of managed press releases. My hand rested instinctively on my stomach, a gesture of both protection and profound connection. This baby, our baby, was the one pure thing in this gilded cage. He was a secret I held close, a tiny, fluttering heartbeat that was mine alone in the quiet moments before dawn. "Maria, darling." Alexander's voice, smooth as scotch but with an edge of steel, cut through my thoughts. He glided to my side, a perfect specimen of tailored success in his Tom Ford tuxedo. His hand found the small of my back, a possessive gesture that looked like affection to the untrained eye. To me, it was a leash. "Stop hiding in the corners. People will talk." "I was just admiring the view, Alexander," I said, my voice a practiced melody of calm. "The view is in the room, not outside," he corrected, his thumb pressing just a little too hard. "It's the people who write the checks. Go talk to the Vanderbilts. I saw Eleanor eyeing your necklace." The necklace in question was the Star of Caldwell, a diamond so large and flawless it felt like a beautiful weight on my collarbone, another one of his strategic acquisitions. I was merely the mannequin. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Of course." As I turned, my eyes met a pair across the room. They belonged to Isabella Rossi, a woman whose name was whispered in the circles we moved in. She was an art curator, impossibly chic, with a razor-sharp wit and a reputation for acquiring more than just paintings. She was Alexander's latest project, his new shiny object of fascination. Her crimson dress was a slash of defiance in the sea of muted tones, and she wore it like armor. She held Alexander's gaze for a fraction too long, a silent conversation passing between them that I was not privy to. It was a language of power, lust, and shared secrets. I had once been fluent in it. Now I was the forgotten dialect. I spent the next hour drifting through conversations, a ghost in my own home. I discussed art with a woman who owned a Monet, charity with a man who exploited third-world labor, and summer plans with people who considered the Hamptons slumming it. Each smile was an effort. Each laugh a betrayal to the screaming anxiety in my chest. My baby kicked, a small, insistent reminder of the life that depended on me, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. I excused myself, seeking refuge on the terrace. The wind was sharp, but it was real. It whipped a strand of hair across my face, and for a moment I could breathe. I watched the city pulse below, a living, breathing entity, so unlike the sterile perfection of my life. The terrace door slid open. It was Isabella. "He'll be furious you're out here," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. She stood beside me, not looking at me, but at the skyline. He hates when his possessions aren't where he left them. The insult was so direct, so devoid of pretense, it almost made me laugh. I'm not a possession. She finally turned to me, her dark eyes assessing. Aren't you? This dress, that necklace, this baby. She gestured vaguely toward my stomach. It's all part of his portfolio. The beautiful wife, the heir. It's a good look for him. And what are you? I asked, my voice colder than the wind. A short-term investment, a speculative asset? A flicker of something, hurt, respect, crossed her face before it was replaced by a wry smile. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a woman who knows that in this world, you either own or you are owned. I'm just trying to get the best possible price. The honesty was disarming. We were two sides of the same coin, both bartering our souls in Alexander's marketplace. Before I could respond, the door slid open again, and Alexander was there, his face a thundercloud. What is this, a secret meeting? His eyes darted between us, suspicion coiling in his gaze. Just getting some air, darling, Isabella said, her tone shifting instantly to a playful purr. She laid a hand on his arm. Maria was just telling me how much she loves the new sculpture. You have such exquisite taste. Alexander's focus shifted to me, his eyes narrowing. Is that right? Because you looked like you were plotting. You know I don't like that. He stepped closer, his presence sucking the air from the terrace. He was smiling, but his eyes were chips of ice. You've been off all night, Maria. Moody. It's unbecoming. I'm just a little tired, I murmured, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and his lip curled in a sneer. Don't use that as an excuse. My mother worked in a factory until the day I was born. You stand around looking pretty. It's not that difficult. The cruelty of it, so casual and so public, stole my breath. Isabella watched, her expression unreadable. She was a spectator at the Colosseum, waiting to see who the lions would devour. Perhaps Mrs. Caldwell needs a drink to relax, Isabella suggested, her voice silky. She picked up a flute of champagne from a passing tray and handed it to Alexander. Go on, Alexander. Be a good husband. It was a test, a power play. She was goading him, using me as the pawn to prove her influence over him. Alexander took the glass, his eyes never leaving mine. My wife doesn't drink, he said softly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. But perhaps she needs a reminder of her duties. He took a step toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this look. It was the precursor to a storm, the chilling calm before the violence. Alexander, don't, I whispered, taking a step back. Don't what? He hissed, his voice low and menacing. Don't ask my wife to be charming at my own party. Don't ask her to be grateful for the life I've given her. He was playing to his audience of one. He needed to show Isabella that he was the one in control, that I was nothing, that she was the one with the real power. You're making a scene, I said, my voice trembling. I'm making a scene? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You're the one who's always miserable, the one who can't even pretend to be happy. You are an embarrassment. And then, with a flick of his wrist, he threw the glass. It wasn't aimed at the floor. It was aimed at me. I flinched, turning my head, but it was too late. The crystal flute struck the wall beside my head, exploding in a shower of glass and champagne. The cold liquid drenched my hair and shoulder, and a sharp, searing pain erupted on my cheek. I reached up, my fingers coming away wet and sticky with blood. A tiny, razor-sharp shard of the baccarat crystal was embedded in my skin, just below my eye. The world went silent. The city noise, the distant music, the wind. It all faded away. There was only the thudding of my own heart, the sting in my cheek, and the two figures standing before me. Alexander looked at the blood on my face and then at his hand, as if surprised by what it had done. But there was no remorse in his eyes, There was only annoyance, as if I had inconvenienced him by bleeding on his terrace. Isabella's mask of cool indifference finally cracked. For a single, unguarded moment, I saw genuine shock, even a flicker of fear. She hadn't expected this. She had poked the bear, and it had mauled the wrong person. Then the mask was back in place. She looked away, toward the glittering, indifferent city, and in that moment, I understood. She was owned, just like me, and the price was higher than either of us had ever imagined. The silence on the terrace stretched for an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren rising from the streets below. The single drop of blood that had welled up from the cut on my cheek began a slow, deliberate journey down my skin, a tear of crimson tracing a path through my shock. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing, replaying the last 30 seconds in a sickening loop. The sneer, the flick of the wrist, the explosion of glass, the searing pain. Alexander was the first to break the tableau. He let out a sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated irritation, as if I had spilled wine on his favorite suit. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, his movements precise and controlled. He was already managing the situation, containing the damage. "For God's sake, Maria, don't be so dramatic," he said, his voice a low growl. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his breast pocket, not to offer it to me, but to dab at a small splash of champagne on his own lapel. "It barely touched you." It barely touched me. The words echoed in the silent space between us. He wasn't looking at the blood, at the shard of glass still embedded in my skin. He was looking at the inconvenience, the mess. I was the mess. My gaze shifted to Isabella. The shock on her face had been replaced by a carefully constructed neutrality. She refused to meet my eyes, focusing instead on a point just over my shoulder. She was complicit in her silence, an accessory after the fact. Her little power play had spiraled out of her control, and now she was retreating, leaving me alone in the wreckage. She had wanted to see who the lions would devour, and having seen, she had decided it was better to be on the lion's side. "You should go inside and clean yourself up," Alexander commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "People will start to wonder where we are." He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. "And you will say you slipped, that you stumbled and knocked a glass over. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. It was the script for the next scene in our carefully produced play. I was to be the clumsy, pregnant wife, and he, the concerned, doting husband. The truth was to be swept under the rug, along with the shards of crystal. My voice, when it finally came, was a hoarse whisper. "You threw a glass at me." The statement hung in the air, a fragile, undeniable truth. Alexander's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his sheer physical presence a threat. "Don't be ridiculous. It slipped. Now go. We'll discuss your behavior later." His gaze flickered toward the main party room, where the silhouettes of his guests danced and laughed, oblivious. His reputation was out there, mingling, drinking, and writing checks. He couldn't afford for it to be tarnished by something as trivial as his wife's blood. Without another word, he turned and offered his arm to Isabella. "Come, my dear. Let's not let a minor spill ruin the evening." Isabella hesitated for only a second before taking his arm, her crimson dress a bloody smear against his black tuxedo. She cast one last, fleeting glance at me, a look I couldn't decipher. Was it pity? Guilt? Or just the cold calculation of a survivor? Then they were gone, swallowed back into the warmth and light of the party, leaving me alone in the cold, dark silence. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I finally moved, pushing the terrace door open and slipping past the throng of guests. No one noticed me. I was invisible, a shadow moving along the edges of their glittering world. I made my way to our private wing of the penthouse, my hand protectively covering the cut on my cheek. The master bathroom was a cavern of white marble and gold fixtures, a temple of sterile luxury. I stared at my reflection in the vast, illuminated mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were wide with a terror I had been suppressing for years. Her face was pale, except for the ugly, angry gash on her cheek. The emerald dress and the diamond necklace were a costume, a mockery of the woman trapped inside. With trembling fingers, I reached for a pair of tweezers from the vanity. My reflection mimicked the movement, her hand shaking just as badly as mine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The tip of the tweezer touched the shard of glass. It was small, no bigger than a grain of rice, but it was lodged deep. I bit my lip, tasting the salt of my own tears as I pulled. The shard came free with a sickening little tug, and a fresh wave of blood followed it. I dropped the piece of glass into the marble sink. It made a tiny, insignificant tink, a sound that seemed to amplify the silence of the room. I stared at it, this small, sharp piece of truth. It was proof. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. He had thrown a glass at me. I splashed my face with cold water, cleaning the wound as best I could. The bleeding subsided, leaving behind a raw, angry line. I knew it would scar. A permanent reminder. Another mark on my soul, this one just visible on the surface. I thought about the baby. My baby. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just my pain, my humiliation. It was about the life I was carrying, the innocent soul who deserved more than a mother who was a ghost and a father who was a monster. For years, I had made excuses for Alexander. His temper was a product of his stressful job. His control was a manifestation of his love. His cruelty was a rare lapse, an exception to the rule. But staring at that shard of glass in the sink, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't an exception. It was the rule, the luxury, the parties, the philanthropy. That was the exception. The cold, quiet rage, the casual cruelty, the iron fist in the velvet glove, that was the real Alexander Caldwell. The sound of the bathroom door opening made me jump. Alexander stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The party was clearly over. "Are you done with your little melodrama?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. I didn't answer. I just stared at him. My silence a newfound weapon. He walked over to the sink, saw the shard of glass, and scoffed. He turned on the faucet, washing it down the drain without a second thought. He was erasing the evidence, erasing the truth. "You'll have the best plastic surgeon in the city look at that tomorrow," he said, gesturing to my cheek. "No one will ever know." He took a sip of his whiskey. "I've already spoken to the staff. They know the story. You slipped. You were clumsy. End of discussion." He expected me to nod, to acquiesce, to be the good, obedient wife. But something inside me had broken tonight, right along with that baccarat flute. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now mingled with something else, a hard, unyielding core of defiance. "I'm not a child, Alexander," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "You don't get to tell me what happened." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged. "I'm not having this conversation tonight, Maria. I'm tired. And frankly, you've disappointed me." He turned to leave, considering the matter closed. "I could have been blinded," I said to his back. "The glass could have hit my eye." He stopped, his back still to me. "But it didn't," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "So let's not dwell on hypotheticals. Be grateful for what you have. Most women would kill to be in your position." He walked out, leaving me alone once more in the marble mausoleum. He was right. Most women would kill to be in my position. But for the first time, I realized my position was killing me. And as I stood there, my hand on my belly, I knew I had to find a way out. Not just for me, but for the tiny, innocent life that was counting on me. The silence of our home had always been a sign of Alexander's control. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like the quiet before a storm that I was going to have to learn to unleash. The next 48 hours passed in a surreal, muffled haze. Alexander acted as if nothing had happened. He left for his office at dawn, his footsteps silent on the plush carpets, and returned long after I had retreated to the sterile comfort of our bedroom. He sent flowers, 24 white roses, a funereal arrangement that felt more like a threat than an apology. A text message followed. "Dr. Marlowe's office will call to schedule your appointment. He's the best." There was no, "I'm sorry," no, "Are you okay?" Just the cold, efficient logistics of erasing his crime. I spent the days in a state of suspended animation, wandering the vast, empty penthouse like a specter. The staff moved around me with downcast eyes and hushed voices. They knew. They had heard the crash, seen me retreat with blood on my face. They had been given the official story. Mrs. Caldwell had a dizzy spell, she's fine, just a little shaken, and they played their parts perfectly. Their silence was bought and paid for, just like my own. The cut on my cheek was a throbbing physical reminder of the truth. I covered it with concealer, a futile attempt to hide the ugliness. But I could still feel it, a tiny fault line in the smooth facade of my face. It was on the third morning that the world tilted on its axis. I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a cup of herbal tea, when my phone buzzed with an alert from a news app. I usually ignored them. Endless notifications about stock market fluctuations and political scandals that felt a world away. But this one was different. The headline was a gut punch. Leaked video shows billionaire Alexander Caldwell assaulting pregnant wife at lavish NYC gala. My heart stopped. My hand trembled so violently that the tea sloshed over the rim of the cup, scalding my fingers. I barely felt it. With a sense of dread so profound it was nauseating, I tapped the link. The video was grainy, shot from a low angle, likely from a phone hidden at waist level. It was clearly filmed by one of the catering staff, someone moving through the party, their perspective obscured by trays of canapes and champagne flutes. The audio was muffled, a cacophony of music and chatter. But then the camera angle shifted, zooming in shakily on the terrace. And there we were, 3 figures silhouetted against the glittering skyline. Alexander, Isabella, and me. The video had no sound of our conversation, only the ambient noise of the party. But the visuals were damningly clear. You could see Alexander's face, contorted with rage. You could see my fear, the way I recoiled. You could see Isabella, a silent, watchful presence. And then you could see the flick of his wrist, the explosion of the glass, my hand flying to my cheek. The camera lingered for a few horrifying seconds on my face, the zoom unable to focus properly, but the dark smudge of blood stark against my pale skin. Then it showed Alexander and Isabella turning their backs on me and walking away, a portrait of chilling indifference. The video ended abruptly. It was only 27 seconds long. 27 seconds that ripped the carefully constructed fabric of our lives to shreds. I watched it again and again. Each time, a fresh wave of sickness and shame washed over me. The world was now seeing what I had lived with in private. My deepest humiliation, my most vulnerable moment, was now a piece of viral content, being shared, commented on, and dissected by millions of strangers. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Texts, missed calls, social media notifications. The dam had broken. "Maria, is this real? Call me." From a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Alexander Caldwell is a monster." "Justice for Maria," a tweet from a complete stranger. "That poor woman, and she's pregnant," a comment on a blog. The story was everywhere. The New York Post, the Daily Mail, Forbes, even the BBC. The video was the lead story on every news channel. Pundits were analyzing it frame by frame. Body language experts were dissecting Alexander's narcissistic rage. Domestic violence hotlines were being flooded with calls. My private pain had become public property. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of dissociation. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life, but the woman with the blood on her cheek was me. The monster was my husband. The sound of the front door slamming open jolted me back to reality. Alexander stormed in, his face pale and slick with sweat. He wasn't wearing his usual immaculate suit. His shirt was untucked, his tie ripped from his collar. He held his phone in his hand like a weapon. "What did you do?" he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous apartment. I didn't do anything," I stammered, shrinking back into the chair. "Don't lie to me!" He strode across the room and loomed over me, his shadow falling across my body. "You leaked this! You wanted to destroy me!" "No, Alexander, I swear I don't know how—" "Who did you talk to? Which one of your pathetic gold-digging friends did you cry to?" He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild with a panic I had never seen before. This wasn't his usual cold, controlled anger. This was fear. Raw, primal fear. His empire was built on a foundation of public perception, and that foundation was crumbling. "I didn't talk to anyone," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I did what you told me. I said I slipped." He stared at me, his mind racing, trying to find another explanation, another person to blame. "The staff. It must have been one of the staff. I'll find them. I'll sue them into oblivion. I'll ruin them." He started pacing, a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. "My board is calling an emergency meeting. Our stock has plummeted 30% since the market opened. 30%. Do you have any idea what that means?" He kicked an ottoman, sending it flying across the room. "This is a disaster. A complete and utter disaster." He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't worried about the baby. He wasn't even worried about the fact that he had committed an act of violence. He was worried about the stock price. The phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound. It was his PR chief. Alexander snatched it up. "What? No, of course it's not what it looks like. A deepfake? Can we say it's a deepfake? What do you mean it's too clear? A joint statement? With her? Are you insane? Fine. Draft something. Something about stress and a private matter, and make it good or you're fired." He hung up, throwing the phone onto the sofa. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just anger, but a sliver of desperation. He needed me. He needed me to play my part, to help him clean up his mess. The power dynamic for the first time in our marriage had shifted, just a fraction of an inch. "They're drafting a statement for us to release," he said, his voice calmer now, more calculated. "We'll say we were having a private argument, that I was careless with a gesture, and that we deeply regret the invasion of our privacy. We'll say we are united, that we are dealing with this as a family, and that we ask for space as we prepare for the birth of our child." He was using our baby, using this unborn child as a shield, a prop to garner sympathy. The thought was so vile, so manipulative, it extinguished the last embers of fear within me, replacing them with a cold, hard rage. I stood up, my own body feeling strangely steady. I walked over to the window, turning my back on him. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, turning to face him. "I will not stand next to you and lie. I will not be your prop. I will not help you cover this up." He stared at me, dumbfounded, as if the furniture had suddenly started talking back. "Maria, this is not the time for your little tantrums. This is about survival. Our survival." "No, Alexander," I said, my hand resting on my stomach, a gesture that was no longer just protective, but defiant. "This is about my survival, and his. The viral storm had been meant to destroy me, to humiliate me. But as I stood there, looking at the panic in my husband's eyes, I realized it had done something else entirely. It had given me a strange, terrifying kind of freedom. The worst had happened. The secret was out, and I had nothing left to lose. The penthouse, once a symbol of my ascent into a world of unimaginable luxury, had transformed into a prison of suffocating silence. Alexander, consumed by a frantic damage control campaign, was rarely home. He was a phantom presence, his existence marked only by the discarded newspapers with his face on the cover and the faint, lingering scent of his expensive cologne in the elevator. When he was there, the air crackled with a tension so thick I felt I had to push my way through it to get from one room to another. We didn't speak. We orbited each other like two hostile planets, held in a delicate, dangerous balance by a gravity of shared history and mutual resentment. My gilded cage now had bars made of public opinion. I was trapped not just by Alexander's wealth, but by the world's sudden, intense scrutiny. Paparazzi were camped outside our building, their long-lensed cameras aimed at our windows like sniper rifles. Every time I looked down at the street, I saw them, a pack of wolves waiting for a glimpse of their wounded prey. I was a headline, a hashtag, a cautionary tale. Dr. Marlowe, the plastic surgeon Alexander had hired, was as discreet and seamless as his work. He made a house call, his face a perfect mask of professional sympathy. He examined the cut on my cheek under a bright, sterile light in my own bathroom. "It's clean, but it will certainly scar if we don't intervene," he said, his voice a soothing murmur. "I can perform a minor revision under local anesthetic, a few micro-stitches. In a few months, with some laser treatments, it will be virtually invisible." Virtually invisible. The words hung in the air. That was Alexander's entire philosophy on life. Make the ugly things disappear. I looked at my reflection. The cut wasn't just a wound, it was a brand. It was the one piece of tangible evidence I had, written on my own skin. "No, thank you, doctor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I think I'll let it heal on its own." Dr. Marlowe raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I would strongly advise against that, Mrs. Caldwell, for cosmetic reasons." "My husband is paying you for your medical advice, not your cosmetic opinions," I replied, a newfound boldness surprising me. "And I am declining the procedure." He was taken aback, clearly unused to a patient, especially one in my position, defying his expert recommendation. He packed his bag in a flustered silence, promising to send a bill to Mr. Caldwell's office. When he left, I felt a small, triumphant victory. It was the first decision I had made for myself about my own body in years. This scar would be my own, a reminder of why I couldn't go back. My days fell into a strange, lonely routine. I would wake up, eat the breakfast prepared by a silent chef, and then wander the apartment. I started reading again, devouring novels I had bought years ago and never opened. I was searching for escape, for lives and worlds that were not my own. But every story of a woman finding her strength, of a hero overcoming adversity, felt like a personal indictment. What was I doing? Hiding in my cage, waiting for my captor to decide my fate. The baby was my constant companion. His kicks and flutters a secret conversation between us. I would talk to him, my hand pressed against my stomach, whispering promises that I had no idea how I would keep. "I'll get us out of here," I would murmur into the silent rooms. "I promise you'll be safe. You'll be free." One afternoon, while scrolling through the endless torrent of news articles about my own life, I stumbled upon a name, Anya Sharma. She was a lawyer, but the articles didn't describe her as a typical high-powered attorney. They called her a giant slayer, a champion for the voiceless. She specialized in representing women in high-profile, high-net-worth domestic abuse cases. Her client list was a secret, but the results were not. She had taken on some of the most powerful men in the country and won. I found her firm's website. It was minimalist and professional, with a simple contact form. Staring at the blank fields, my heart began to pound. This was a line I could not uncross. Contacting a lawyer was an act of war. Alexander had an army of them on retainer, men who were paid to bury people like me. For an hour, I just stared at the screen. Fear and resolve wrestled within me. The fear was a familiar companion, a cold hand on the back of my neck. It whispered all the reasons I shouldn't. He'll find out. He'll take the baby. He'll destroy you. You have no money of your own, no power. But the resolve was new. It was a tiny flame, kindled by the humiliation on the terrace and fanned by the global reaction. The world, in its strange, voyeuristic way, was on my side. For the first time, I wasn't entirely alone. My fingers, moving as if with a will of their own, began to type. Name, Maria Caldwell. Email. I used a new anonymous email address I had created the day before. Message. I paused, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I say? My billionaire husband threw a glass at my head and the whole world saw it? It sounded insane. I took a deep breath and wrote from the heart. My name is Maria Caldwell. You may have seen my name in the news. The video is real. I am a prisoner in my own home and I am scared. But I am more scared of bringing my child into this life. I need help. I don't have access to my own money, but I need to know if I have any options. Please. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The moment I did, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I threw the phone onto the sofa as if it were on fire. What had I done? Alexander had surveillance software on everything. He monitored my calls, my emails, my credit card statements. He would know. But as the minutes ticked by and the world didn't end, the terror slowly subsided, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. I had sent a message in a bottle, a flare into the dark night. Now, all I could do was wait and see if anyone would answer. The gilded cage was still locked, but for the first time I felt like I might have found a key. The reply came 24 hours later. It was a simple, unadorned email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Your Inquiry. We have received your message. If you are able to talk securely, please be at the southeast corner of the Conservatory Garden in Central Park tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. Look for a woman reading a book with a plain blue cover. Do not bring your phone. This email will self-delete in 5 minutes. There was no name, no signature, just cold, clear instructions. It was cloak and dagger, something out of a spy novel, and the paranoia it induced was terrifying. But beneath the fear was a spark of exhilaration. Someone had answered my flare. Getting out of the penthouse alone and without my phone was a challenge in itself. Alexander had assigned a driver, a hulking man named Sergei, with a neck as thick as my thigh, to be my shadow. He wasn't a chauffeur, he was a warden. That morning, I feigned a sudden, intense craving for a specific brand of artisanal pickles, sold only at a small deli in the West Village. It was the kind of nonsensical, demanding behavior Alexander expected from a pampered, pregnant woman. Sergei, I called, affecting a tone of weary urgency. I need you to go get something for me. It's very important. He looked at me with his flat, expressionless eyes. Mr. Caldwell said I am not to leave you. Mr. Caldwell also doesn't want to be woken up at 3 a.m. by his hysterical wife crying about pickles, I countered, putting a hand to my forehead as if staving off a wave of nausea. Trust me. This is the easier option for everyone. It's for the baby. The baby was my trump card, the one thing that could override Alexander's direct orders. Sergei hesitated, then gave a curt nod. It would take him at least an hour to get downtown and back. The window was open. As soon as his car disappeared into the stream of traffic, I moved. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. I grabbed a cashmere shawl, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a prepaid Metro card I had stashed away months ago after a rare, supervised solo trip to a museum. I took the service elevator down to the sub-basement, my heart pounding with every floor we passed. I emerged into a grimy loading dock, scurrying past dumpsters and laundry carts into the anonymous chaos of a midtown side street. The subway was a shock to the system. The noise, The crowds, the sheer, unvarnished humanity of it all was overwhelming after years of sanitized, chauffeur-driven isolation. I felt like a foreigner in my own city. But I also felt invisible. Just another face in the crowd, and the anonymity was intoxicating. I arrived at the conservatory garden with 10 minutes to spare. The garden was an oasis of tranquility, a world away from the concrete and steel that surrounded it. I found the southeast corner near a wrought iron bench overlooking a profusion of white roses. And there she was. A woman sat on the bench, engrossed in a book with a plain, royal blue cover. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm, focused intensity. She was dressed in simple, elegant trousers and a silk blouse, understated and professional. This had to be Anya Sharma. I approached slowly, my hands clammy. "Excuse me?" I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I was just admiring your book." She looked up, her eyes scanning my face, taking in the sunglasses, the shawl, and the faint, fading bruise on my cheek that no concealer could fully hide. A flicker of recognition, and then a small, reassuring smile. "It's a good one," she said, closing the book and patting the empty space beside her on the bench. "Please sit. I'm Anya." "Maria," I breathed, sinking onto the bench, my legs suddenly weak. "I know," she said gently. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." For a few moments, we sat in silence, watching a groundskeeper meticulously prune the rose bushes. "He has people watching the building," I said finally, "and my phone, my email. I'm sure he monitors everything." "Standard procedure for men like your husband," Anya said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Control is their oxygen. The first thing we need to do is establish a secure line of communication. We'll get you a new phone, a clean one. We'll only speak through encrypted apps." She spoke with such calm authority, it was as if she were discussing the weather. It was clear she had done this 100 times before. "I don't have any money," I confessed, the words tasting like ash. "He controls everything. The accounts are all in his name. I have an allowance, but he tracks every penny." "Also standard," she said with a nod. "Don't worry about my fee for now. In cases like this, we can petition the court to have your husband cover your legal costs. A judge will often grant it to ensure a level playing field. And Alexander Caldwell, after that video, is not going to want to fight that motion in front of a judge." The idea that Alexander could be forced to pay for my legal battle against him was a revelation. It was a small crack in his fortress of power. "What do I do?" I asked, feeling a desperate sense of helplessness. "Where do I even begin?" Anya turned to face me, her expression serious. "First, you need to understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Men like Alexander don't just let go. They fight, and they fight dirty. He will try to paint you as an unstable, vindictive gold digger. He will use your pregnancy, your emotions, anything he can against you." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "So, our first job is to gather evidence. Quietly. You are our inside source. I need you to be a detective in your own home. Financial records, emails, text messages, anything that proves his control, his temper, his infidelity. Does he keep a second phone? Does he have a private office in the penthouse? A safe?" I thought of the sleek black titanium safe hidden behind a false panel in his walk-in closet. I had seen him use it only a handful of times. I didn't know the combination. "There's a safe," I told her. Anya's eyes lit up. "Good. That's very good. We won't do anything about it yet, but it's a start." Suddenly, a new voice cut through our conversation. "I thought I might find you here." I whipped my head around, my blood turning to ice. A woman stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. It was Isabella Rossi. My first instinct was panic. She would go straight to Alexander. I was caught. It was over. But Anya remained perfectly calm. She simply looked at Isabella and said, "You're late." I stared at Anya, then at Isabella, my mind struggling to connect the dots. You know each other?" Isabella walked over, her gaze fixed on me. The wry, cynical mask was gone. Her face was pale and her eyes were shadowed with what looked like genuine fear. "Anya is my lawyer too," she said quietly. The world tilted again. The mistress. My husband's mistress was here with my lawyer. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Alexander is a monster, Maria," Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you have no reason to believe me, and even less reason to trust me. I was a coward on that terrace. I was scared. When he threw that glass, I saw what he was capable of, and I realized that one day it could be me." She took a shaky breath. "He promised me everything, a gallery, a partnership, but it was all lies. It was all about control. The day after the video leaked, he got violent with me. He blamed me for goading him, for ruining his reputation." She didn't elaborate, but the dark bruise hidden under the sleeve of her silk blouse told its own story. I was speechless. We were not rivals. We were fellow victims, caught in the same web, manipulated by the same master puppeteer. "Isabella came to me 2 days ago," Anya explained gently. "She is willing to testify, to tell the court everything she knows about Alexander's business dealings, his temper, his threats. She can corroborate your story." An alliance. A secret, unthinkable alliance. The wife and the mistress united against the man who thought he owned them both. It was a twist I could never have imagined. Isabella looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Maria, and I'm not asking for it, but I want to help you. I want to help us both. He will try to crush us, but maybe together, maybe we stand a chance." I looked from her face to Anya's. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. A flicker of power, a whisper of hope. I was no longer a lone operative. I had an ally. We had a general. The war had just begun. Alexander Caldwell believed the world was a machine, a complex, intricate system of levers and gears that if you were smart enough and ruthless enough, you could operate to your exact specifications. For 45 years, he had been the master engineer. He pulled a lever and money flowed. He turned a gear and people obeyed. His marriage, his business, his public image, all were cogs in the grand, gleaming machine of his life. The video was not a malfunction, it was a wrench thrown into the works. In the days following the leak, Alexander's first instinct was to apply overwhelming force. He dispatched his legal team, a pack of sharks who smelled blood in the water, to file lawsuits against every blog and news outlet that hosted the video. He hired a team of digital forensics experts to hunt down the source of the leak, offering a 7-figure reward for the name of the caterer who had dared to film him. He orchestrated a PR campaign designed to reframe the narrative, painting himself as a man under immense pressure, protecting his pregnant wife from the intrusive glare of the media. But the machine was not responding. The lawsuits were met with derision, framed by the media as a classic example of a billionaire bully trying to silence the truth. The caterer had vanished, likely paid off by a rival media outlet and hidden away until the opportune moment. And the PR campaign was a spectacular failure. The public wasn't buying it. The image of him throwing a glass at his pregnant wife was too visceral, too damning. It had seared itself into the collective consciousness. His world, once so meticulously controlled, began to fracture. He sat in his cavernous office. The skyline of Manhattan spread before him like a kingdom in revolt. The numbers on his screen were all red. Caldwell Industries stock was in a freefall. Board members, who had once fawned over his every word, were now calling for an independent investigation into his conduct. Longtime business partners were suddenly re-evaluating their relationship with the company. The machine was grinding to a halt, and he didn't know how to fix it. His rage, usually a cold, precise instrument he could wield at will, was now a hot, chaotic inferno burning inside him. He had smashed a tablet against the wall that morning, the shattered screen a mirror of his own splintering control. His father's voice echoed in his head, a ghost from his childhood. "Sentiment is a weakness, Alexander. Power is the only currency that matters. Never let them see you bleed. His father, a self-made tyrant who had built a scrap metal empire through sheer, brutal force of will, had forged Alexander in his own image. He had taught him that the world was a battlefield, and you were either a predator or you were prey. He had beaten the sentiment out of him, replacing it with a relentless, insatiable hunger for more. More money, more power, more control. He had acquired Maria the same way he had acquired a company or a piece of art. She was beautiful, elegant, from a good family that had fallen on hard times. She was the perfect accessory, a testament to his success. He had believed he was giving her a paradise, a life of unimaginable ease. He had bought her, and he expected her to be grateful for the transaction. Her defiance now was incomprehensible to him. It was as if a painting had decided to walk out of its frame. His attempts to control her were failing. She was polite, distant, and utterly immovable. Her quiet no to his demand for a joint statement had been a declaration of war, and he was losing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Blackwood is on line 1. Robert Blackwood was the patriarch of the Caldwell Industries Board, a man whose connections ran as deep as the foundations of Wall Street. Alexander jabbed the speakerphone button. "Robert," he said, forcing a calm he did not feel. "Alexander," Blackwood's voice was gravelly, impatient. "We have a problem. The consortium for the Tokyo project is pulling out. They cited the reputational risk associated with your current situation. The Tokyo project was Alexander's magnum opus, a multi-billion-dollar development that was meant to be his legacy. They can't do that. We have a contract. They're willing to pay the penalty clause, Alexander. They'd rather lose $100 million than be in business with you right now. The video has gone global. You're toxic." Toxic. The word hit him like a physical blow. "I'll fix it," Alexander insisted, his voice tight. "How?" Blackwood demanded. "Your wife has gone silent. She hasn't been seen, hasn't made a statement. The world thinks you have her locked in that ivory tower of yours. It looks terrible." "She's pregnant. She's resting." "She's a liability," Blackwood shot back. "And so are you. The board has voted. We're invoking the morality clause in your contract. We're placing you on an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately." The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone, his mind reeling. His own company, his own board. They were cutting him out. He felt a wave of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. His father's voice was back, dripping with contempt. "Weak. You let them beat you." He swept his arm across his desk, sending a cascade of papers, awards, and photographs crashing to the floor. One of the photos was of him and Maria on their wedding day. They were smiling. A perfect couple. A perfect lie. He sank into his chair, the rage momentarily extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of something other than anger or ambition. It was a cold, unfamiliar feeling. It was fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of losing everything. The fear of being nothing. His mind turned to Isabella. She had been his escape, his validation. She was sharp, ambitious, and unburdened by the cloying sentimentality he despised in Maria. But since the incident, she too had grown distant. She wasn't answering his calls. He had gone to her apartment the other day, pounding on the door, but she hadn't answered. He had thought she was just being difficult, playing a game. Now, a darker suspicion began to creep in. He had built his empire on the principle of control. He controlled his company, his wife, his mistress, his public image. But the cracks were spreading, the facade crumbling, and the machine was breaking down. He was losing his grip on all of it. He picked up the framed photo from the floor. He looked at Maria's face, at the smile that had always seemed just a little too perfect. He had never once stopped to consider what she was thinking, what she was feeling. She was an object, a beautiful, valuable object. But objects don't fight back. Objects don't have the power to bring down empires. He had underestimated her. And in the cold, sterile silence of his office, With the ruins of his desk around him, Alexander Caldwell finally realized that this was a battle he might not win. The predator was, for the first time in his life, starting to feel like the prey. The day of the deposition was gray and overcast, the sky over Manhattan the color of unpolished steel. It felt appropriate. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my new modest apartment, a two-bedroom rental on the Upper West Side secured by Anya's firm, and took a deep breath. The woman looking back at me was someone I was still getting to know. I was no longer wearing designer gowns. Today, my armor was a simple dark gray dress, professional and unassuming. My only piece of jewelry was a thin silver bracelet, a gift from my mother that I had kept hidden away during my marriage. The cut on my cheek had healed into a thin, pale scar, a faint silver crescent just below my eye. I had refused Anya's offer to have a makeup artist cover it. I wanted him to see it. I wanted the world to see it. My hand rested on the now prominent curve of my stomach. My son. He was my strength, my reason, my entire world. Today, I was fighting for him. Anya had prepped me for weeks. We had gone over every possible question, every psychological trick Alexander's lawyers would try to pull. They would call me a liar, a mentally unstable hysteric, a calculating gold digger who had staged the entire incident. They would try to provoke me, to make me cry, to make me angry. Your greatest weapon is your calm, Anya had told me, her voice firm but kind. You are not the hysterical woman they want to portray. You are a calm, credible, and composed mother-to-be who is telling the truth. Let your truth be the only thing that matters. The law firm where the deposition was being held was a temple of corporate power, all dark wood, polished brass, and hushed, intimidating silence. It was Alexander's territory. As we walked into the conference room, my heart hammered against my ribs. And there he was. He sat at the far end of a long, imposing mahogany table, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers who looked like they had been carved from granite. Alexander looked diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, coiled energy. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was a king in exile, and he radiated a bitter, impotent rage. His eyes met mine across the table. I saw a flicker of shock as he looked at me. He was expecting the timid, frightened Maria he had controlled for years. He wasn't prepared for the quiet strength in my gaze. His eyes darted to the scar on my cheek, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something that looked like shame before it was swallowed by anger. I took my seat opposite him, with Anya by my side. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. A court stenographer sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. A videographer adjusted a camera pointed directly at me. Alexander's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne with a predatory smile, began the proceedings. For the record, could you please state your full name? Maria May Caldwell, I said, my voice clear and steady. For the next 3 hours, Thorne tried to dismantle me, piece by piece. He brought up my family's financial troubles before my marriage, implying I had married Alexander for his money. He brought up a therapist I had seen briefly for anxiety, trying to paint me as mentally fragile. He twisted my words, interrupted my answers, and condescended to me with every question. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that you were prone to dramatic outbursts? No, that is not true. Isn't it true that you were unhappy in your marriage and were looking for a way out, a way to secure a generous settlement? I was unhappy because my husband was abusive, I said calmly, looking directly at Alexander. The only thing I want to secure is a safe future for my child. Your husband, a celebrated philanthropist, a titan of industry, you expect this room to believe he would physically assault you? I don't just expect you to believe it, I replied, my voice unwavering. The whole world has seen the proof. Thorne's smile faltered. He was losing control. I wasn't reacting as he had planned. I wasn't breaking. He changed tactics, his voice dripping with false sympathy. The incident on the terrace. It was a terrible accident, wasn't it? Mr. Caldwell was gesturing. The glass was slippery. It simply flew from his hand. "No," I said. He looked me in the eye and he threw it at me. "You were arguing, weren't you? You provoked him, said things to upset him." I told him I was tired. That is what provoked him. The room was silent. Alexander, who had been staring down at the table, looked up, his jaw clenched. Anya chose that moment to intervene. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "My client has been very patient. Now we have a witness. We would like to call Ms. Isabella Rossi." A side door opened and Isabella walked in. If I had looked different, she was transformed. Gone were the designer clothes and the defiant attitude. She was dressed in a simple black suit, her hair pulled back, her face pale and serious. She looked terrified but resolute. Alexander's head snapped up. The color drained from his face. He stared at Isabella with a look of pure, venomous betrayal. This was a blow he had not anticipated. Isabella took her seat, and Anya began her questioning. "Ms. Rossi, were you present on the terrace with Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell on the night of the incident?" "Yes, I was." "Could you please describe what you saw?" Isabella took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on Anya. "Alexander, Mr. Caldwell was angry with Maria. He was berating her. She was calm. He was not. He called her an embarrassment. Then he threw his champagne glass at her." "Did it slip?" Anya asked. "No," Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. "He threw it. It was deliberate. I saw it." Thorne objected, but the damage was done. Isabella went on to describe Alexander's controlling behavior, his explosive temper, the threats he had made to her after the video leaked. She provided text messages, emails. It was a systematic demolition of Alexander's character, delivered by the one person he thought he had under his control. As she spoke, I watched Alexander. The rage had collapsed into something else. Despair. He looked like a man watching his own kingdom burn to the ground. The machine had been completely dismantled, its gears and levers scattered across the floor. The final blow came when Anya presented her masterstroke. "Mr. Caldwell," Anya said, turning her attention to him, "we have a sworn affidavit from a Mr. David Chen, a former employee of your IT department. He has testified that for the past 5 years, you have had him install and maintain illegal surveillance software on all of your wife's electronic devices. He has provided us with logs of your activity. We also have a locksmith who is prepared to testify that the safe in your home office is not a standard model, but a custom-built vault, and he has the records of its installation." Anya slid a document across the table. "This is a motion we are filing with the court to have the safe opened. We believe it contains evidence of financial malfeasance, tax evasion, and other materials relevant to this case. Or you can agree to our settlement terms. The choice is yours." The room was deathly quiet. Alexander stared at the document as if it were a snake. His lawyers whispered frantically to him. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. If that safe was opened, his financial empire, the one thing he had left, would be destroyed. His father's ghost would laugh. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine one last time. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a man. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to his lawyer. It was over. I had won. But as I walked out of that building into the late afternoon sun, which had finally broken through the clouds, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I felt a quiet, profound sense of release. It wasn't about victory or revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my story. The reckoning had come not with a shout, but with the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. 6 months later, I sat on a blanket in the middle of Sheep Meadow, the late spring sun warm on my face. The scent of freshly cut grass and hot pretzels filled the air. A few feet away, my son, Leo, slept peacefully in his stroller, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, gentle rhythm. He was 3 months old, and he was perfect. The world was no longer a stage or a prison. It was just the world, full of ordinary, beautiful things I was only now learning to appreciate. The sound of a dog barking, the laughter of children playing, the feeling of the sun on my skin. These were the riches I had been missing. The divorce had been finalized quickly and quietly. Faced with the evidence Anya had amassed, Alexander had capitulated completely. He had wanted to avoid a public trial at all costs. The settlement was substantial, more money than I could ever spend, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the freedom it represented. The penthouse, the jewelry, the cars, they were all sold. They were artifacts from another life, a life that no longer belonged to me. I had used a portion of the settlement to create the Maria Foundation. Our mission was simple: to provide discreet, comprehensive support for victims of domestic abuse in high-net-worth situations. We offered legal aid, financial counseling, security services, and trauma therapy, all the things I had so desperately needed. Anya sat on the board, and in a surprising turn of events, so did Isabella. Isabella had used her own settlement from Alexander to start a new life. She had moved to London and opened a small independent art gallery that championed emerging female artists. She and I were not friends, not in the traditional sense. The scars of our shared history were too deep for that, but we were allies, bound by a mutual respect and the shared understanding that we had survived the same storm. Her involvement with the foundation was her penance, and her way of ensuring no other woman was left as vulnerable as we had been. Alexander had disappeared from public life. His company had been restructured, his name scrubbed from the letterhead. I heard through Anya that he was living in self-imposed exile in a small, remote town in Switzerland, the one country that wouldn't extradite him for the financial crimes the contents of his safe had revealed. He had lost his empire, his reputation, his wife, and his son. He had sent one letter, passed through his lawyers, to mine. It was short. "I hope he never knows his father." I didn't know if it was an expression of remorse or a final bitter curse. Perhaps it was both. I folded the letter and put it away. Leo would know his story one day, but I would be the one to tell it to him. He would learn about strength, resilience, and the importance of kindness. He would not be raised in the shadow of his father's rage. A shadow fell over my blanket. I looked up to see Anya, smiling, holding 2 cups of iced coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing one to me. She sat down on the blanket, looking at the sleeping baby. "He looks like you." "He has my eyes," I said, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Thank God." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city buzz around us. "You did it, Maria," Anya said softly. "You built a new life, a better one." I looked at my son, at the peaceful park, at the friend sitting beside me. The scar on my cheek was barely visible now, a faint silvery line. I no longer tried to hide it. It was a part of my story, a reminder not of the wound, but of the healing. I was no longer Mrs. Alexander Caldwell, the millionaire's wife. I was Maria, Leo's mother, the founder of a charity, a survivor. My life was not defined by glittering parties or flawless diamonds, but by quiet moments, meaningful work, and the profound, unconditional love for my child. I was richer now than I had ever been. The story of Maria Caldwell is a stark reminder that the most lavish cages are still cages. Her journey from silent victim to a powerful voice for change shows the incredible strength of the human spirit. It wasn't just about a viral video. It was about the moment a woman decided her own life and the life of her child was worth more than any fortune. She found that true wealth isn't what you own, but what you can't lose. If Maria's story of courage and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Her story could be a beacon of hope for someone living in silence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of survival and transformation. Thank you for watching.